This is kind of like the marketing-y bit with the bad fire emoji. Progressive web apps should be fast. This kind of falls into two different categories. Fast for both loading, so getting things onto the screen quickly, both the very first time you open them up, but also repeat visits should be fast. And it should also just be fast when you're interacting with it. Once you actually have things on the screen, hopefully it doesn't feel like it's redrawing the entire screen every time you do some touch scrolling. So that's one general idea, one thing to keep in mind. You want fast. You want things to be integrated. Spoiler alert, this is going to spell fire. Integrated kind of, what does integrated mean? So integrated has something to do with what your expectations are, again, going back to native apps. If you're an Android user, if you're an iOS user, if you're a Windows Phone user, you probably have certain sets of expectations around what happens when you install an app on your phone. It shows up in your task switcher, which you don't necessarily see with URLs that you go to on the web. You have a specific icon in your launcher drawer on your home screen. That's not really something you always see with URLs on the web. This is kind of a different way of thinking about the integration that you could provide in your web app that kind of meet the expectations for a native user. Reliable. This is the part that I kind of spend the most time thinking about. I'll get into a little bit more later, but reliability is something that really has been missing from the web in the same way that you think about reliability when it comes to native applications. I used to really like talking about the experience in the subway. This first of all dates how long I've been talking about this stuff, because we obviously have pretty good cell phone and Wi-Fi in the subway now. But it used to be, at least, you'd be in the subway and you wouldn't even think about going to random URL in your web browser, because it just was not going to work. Like if it's on the web, it's not going to work when you don't have a good connection. And that's something that people have kind of trained in their head to think about the web. But with a native app, you could open up the New York Times or whatever, and you'll probably see some out-of-date cached content, but at least it worked. Like you were able to pull up something and you were able to read it. And that's that type of reliability that the kind of progressive web app experience wants to bring to web applications as well. And finally, engaging. Engaging ties into some of what we were talking before about like being able to do add to home screen. Some of it's re-engagement as well, being able to get people who have used your app before to come back to give them useful notification content, hopefully not spam them with a bunch of stuff, but be able to pull people back in a really meaningful way and make them feel like they are getting value from that type of engagement. And that's something else that we can now do as part of like the whole progressive web app story. So we got fire. The kind of technology that underlies not everything that I just talked about, but a lot of it is something called service workers. I spend most of my time working with various service worker implementations and libraries as part of my day job. So it was really cool coming in and hearing folks talk about Vue. I don't do too much front-end stuff. I do a lot of like tooling stuff and building things that kind of automate this service worker space. But the actual key technology to talk about in this case is service workers. And the technical kind of description is like it's a JavaScript proxy that sits in between your web page and the network and has access to some caches that it could programmatically query. And it just gives you the ability to intercept events and respond to things when your web application is making network requests. That's technically what it is. I kind of like an analogy to explain what's going on, especially for folks who are not familiar with service workers. I'm going to assume that not everybody here has seen them before, or just maybe has seen the word but not necessarily known exactly what they were. The analogy I like is kind of thinking about a service worker as being like an air traffic controller for your web application. And just wanted to kind of work out that flow and just to show what I mean. And hopefully this will get people thinking about it in the right way. So you have a web application. Let's say it's doing typical request. In this particular case, going against the network, it's trying to receive some PNG file in order to display it on the page. Maybe this is just from an image tag or whatever. the actual context of the request doesn't matter so much, but the idea is your web applications need something from the network. When you have a service worker in place, it, again, behaves kind of like an air traffic controller. It sees this request that's taking off in the air. Service worker gets to decide where it goes, basically. So this is code that you have control over. And it looks and says, hey, this is a GET request. This is for this particular URL. And like the very first time your service worker is active for your web application, like maybe it's never seen that URL before. So it's like, OK, I don't know what to do with this specific URL other than just go to the network and let the network resolve the request and get back a response, just like as if there were no service worker at all. And that's fine. That's something a service worker could do. It could basically just say, I'm going to pass this through to the network. The really cool thing, though, is that once you get the response back from the network, you have some more control over what you're going to do with that response. So you can imagine the request going to come in the airplane going for landing. The actual one copy of the request can just go straight back to your web application, just as if there were no service worker involvement at all. From the perspective of your web application, you don't actually have to change anything in order to handle responses from the service worker differently. That's actually a really nice thing from the perspective of treating service workers as progressive enhancement, in that if the service worker weren't involved, the request would come back to your web application looking exactly the same as if the service worker were involved. So you don't have to change your application's code just because there's a service worker there. But the really nice thing is if you do have a service worker there, you have the ability to kind of send this extra copy of the same response to a cache that you have complete control over. And this is something in addition to the HTTP caching that your browsers support. And once you have that copy in the cache, you can make use of it in the future from your service worker. So let's say we have the same request that comes in at some point in the future, through a PNG. Service worker is like, yeah, OK, I've seen this URL before. I know what to do. I don't actually have to go to the network at all. I'm using a cache policy, like a cache-first policy in this particular case. I know the content is not going to change for this given URL. So I feel confident that I could just pull the response directly from the cache and just have it directed for landing straight back to my web application without going to the network at all. So this means better reliability. You don't have to wait for a response from the network. You don't even have to wait for getting back at 304. Nothing's changed response from the network. You could just give something back to your client right away. So better speed, better reliability. Things will work offline. It's great. That's kind of the service worker story in a nutshell. But most folks will probably not feel confident sitting down and writing an error control system from scratch. And service workers probably not quite as complicated, but you don't necessarily want to write all this code from scratch either. So we have some tools to help you. There are very common scenarios when working with service workers for things that you're going to do again and again. You have certain really core assets to your site that you want to make sure that they're cached ahead of time, that they're always available, and that they're kept up to date as you rebuild your site. And then you're probably going to have other things that are maybe API requests or optional requests for images that you're going to use less frequently or just use on certain subsets of your pages. And maybe you do want to go to the network for some of those, and you then want to keep them up to date just as a fallback for when the network's not available. So you have different strategies that are very common. And we wanted to automate the process of both keeping all of your core files up to date and then just making it also easy to have runtime caching strategies for certain things. So as Evan alluded to before, my manager, Adi Asmani, kind of unveiled this at Google I/O this year. This is his slide that I stole, but we have this new PWA template that he was working on and contributed back to the Vue project. And it makes it really easy just to get all of the standard Webpack stuff, but then some additional things that just take advantage of the loading best practices that kind of are available in a lot of browsers now, but also the service worker generation bit. And you get it for free, more or less. So let's try it out. All right, this is where my knowledge of Vue falls down a little bit. So I was learning, and I was trying to come up with a cool example, and it was really easy to get started. I'm going to try to walk through the steps of starting up a Vue project, and let's see if I could just show you then what the experience is like of debugging something that uses service workers and show the offline capabilities and things like that. So we're going to get into the same situation where I'm doing some Vue inits and stuff. So I'm going to just do yes. I'm going to do no to a couple of these things. And this is going to be a weather PWA. So I'm going to do that. I'm not going to do the router. I'm not going to do ESLint. I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to do this. And this might make it a little bit quicker to do the npm install. So I was like, okay, what can I show off? One of the things that's kind of canonical for, well, there's the Hacker News stuff. There's also like weather applications tend to be kind of easy. You just show off pulling down a weather forecast via an API. So it's like, all right, let's do that in Vue. I happen to be flying to Tokyo tomorrow morning. So I need to kind of leave here and pack soon after this. So I was like, okay, let's pull the weather in Tokyo. Let's see what's going on. So all right, first of all, let me just do, I'm going to do the running the build. Yeah, I'm going to do npm run build and serve dist. All right, so one of the things about service workers that you'll notice if you're in the PWA template is that all the service worker stuff is disabled in the dev environment. Dev environment still supports like the hot reloading, all the things that really would get very messed up if you started caching things aggressively, which is what service workers do. So if you want to test out service worker functionality, it's only enabled in the build, like the dist version, basically. All right, so let me just pop this up. Open. This is the very basic template with nothing modified. But one of the cool things is if I go like here to the network, let me make this a little bit bigger, this a little smaller, go offline here, and I reload, everything should work. 0 bytes transferred, everything came from the service worker. You can kind of see over here. Sorry, this is a little small. So this is what you get out of the box, which is really cool. Like, this just works without an internet connection. But let's try changing it around a little bit. So I'm going to close this. You'll see me opening up incognito windows a lot. That's my kind of like shortcut for resetting the state of everything when you're dealing with service workers. Again, things get cached really aggressively, and when you're doing local development and testing out new builds, it helps a lot to start fresh sometimes. So I'm going to cheat a bit. I'm going to copy over this weather really bad component that I'm sure follows no best practices, but should be good enough for our purposes. Let me go into the source, components, solo view, and paste this in. Okay. So I'm just grabbing some weather. This is the Yahoo Weather API, and sorry if this is bad code, but it's making a request, and it's basically setting some properties. And let me do that, save that. I'm going to run that build again. And I will open it up again. Oops. Let me actually open up DevTools at the same time. Yep. Okay, cool. So weather conditions for Tokyo. It is already tomorrow there. It is 81, mostly cloudy, not too different than New York. All right, if I go offline, you'll notice something though. So some things will work. Everything that's basically part of my we call it app shell. That's kind of terminology we use a lot in the progressive web app world. Like everything that's the core components of my Vue and everything else will work because it gets pre-cached automatically as part of the build process. What's not going to work is the weather. That is making this query to the Yahoo data API, and you can kind of see it failing right over here because we're offline. So one quick thing that I want to show you before I finish is just how you take the basic configuration. In this particular case, I think it's the webpack prod config. You get this part by default, basically, where it's initializing what gets pre-cached. And I'm going to stick in one extra thing that is really useful in our case, and I'm saying I would like to use as a runtime caching strategy. This is a slightly different routing syntax. It's basically saying like anything that matches this regular expression, I would like to use a network first policy for. And this is part of the service worker that gets generated. So let me just copy that, close that, go back to my actual Webpack prod config, and paste that into the one that I'm using. And I'm going to do a build one more time. And again, we support a bunch of different strategies. For this particular case, like doing network first made the most sense. Like if we would like to try to go to the network to always get the freshest weather. If the weather was not available from the network, then we're going to fall back to what we had previously cached. There are other strategies like kind of fastest, which is sort of still while revalidate. There's like cache first for certain things. So you kind of have to think about the runtime requests that your app is making and what's most appropriate for your particular use case. All right, and I'm just going to again start fresh. I'm going to do what I did before. I'm going to here, so here is offline, reload again, and things work. And the way to actually take a closer look at what's going on is in this application panel in Chrome DevTools, and it lets you do things like peek into the cache storage and see all the different HTML and JavaScript and things that are cached, and then also take a look at the runtime cache and see what's there. And you kind of see what's going on there. So yeah, that's pretty much what I wanted to talk about. I have a few links over here. That production PWAs with frameworks link is the talk from Google I/O this year that goes in a lot more detail than I just did about Vue and a few other frameworks that do this stuff. Links to the boilerplate. We have some general guidance if you're building a PWA at developers.google.com/web. And finally, if you want these slides for whatever reason, they're there. So cool. Thanks, everybody.